This is the iPad mini 6, and it sort of looks like someone took an iPad Air 4 and shrunk it down. Other than the size, there are important differences when it comes to the display, the cameras, processing power, and accessories. Both are extremely powerful, and there's about $100 difference in terms of the price. So which one is actually better? While the design elements are quite similar, the size is clearly the most obvious differentiator. The iPad mini sports an 8.3-inch display while the iPad Air 4 has a noticeably bigger 10.9-inch display. Now, putting aside the features and the benefits that I'm going to cover throughout the video, the mini is clearly a lighter and more portable device. It's also great to game on because of the smaller form factor, so it's really comfortable to hold, and at the same time it definitely feels bigger than using a phone. The iPad Air 4 makes up for the less convenient size with a larger display that's better for viewing content, for multitasking, and even for things like surfing the web, as it requires less scrolling. Other than the size, there are some differences in the actual quality of the display, which I'll get to in a minute. But first, let's talk about the design. Both iPads are made of machined aluminum and have squared off edges, small bezels, and rounded corners. We've got volume up and down controls on the side of the iPad Air 4, but on the top of the iPad mini because Apple needed to make space for the second generation Apple Pencil, and more on this in a minute. And both have a power button on the top that features Apple's new fingerprint sensor for biometric authentication. The Mini 6 and the iPad Air 4 both have a USB-C port at the bottom for charging and for connecting a whole host of powerful accessories. And both have two stereo speakers, one on each side, even though they both have 4 speaker grills. And I'll talk more about the audio quality later on. Now, going back to the screens, both are liquid retina displays. And as far as differences, the iPad Air 4 is 10.9 inches versus 8.3 inches on the mini. Has a resolution of 2360 by 1640 versus 2266 by 1488, so it's not a huge difference. And the iPad Air 4 has 264 pixels per inch versus the much higher 326 pixels per inch on the Mini 6. Both displays are 60 Hz, they have a maximum brightness of 500 nits, and both are True Tone displays, so there's not much to talk about there. So before it was announced, I was really curious about whether we would get a 120 Hz display on the Mini. That would have been great for gaming, and I wonder if a major hurdle here would have been the battery life. Now, as far as the quality of the display, if we're comparing them head to head, both are good in my opinion and have worked really well for me across the different types of things that I do on my iPads. As I mentioned, the resolution isn't really something that made a drastic difference in terms of real life use, but the size should absolutely be a consideration, and you'll see how that plays out throughout the rest of the video. Now, speaking practically, the larger display on the iPad Air 4 makes it better suited for certain things like watching content or for multitasking. The Mini is really convenient for playing games and reading in bed, where the improved ergonomics of a smaller device are a benefit. My suggestion is that you focus on the types of things that you plan on doing with the iPad and which size would actually work better for you, rather than worrying about the slight differences in the quality of the display. Now let's talk about the camera and audio system, because there are some important differences and upgrades. Also, if you've gotten value from this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Now, looking at the rear-facing cameras, the Mini has a slight advantage, and with the front-facing camera, it has a more significant one. Starting with the rear-facing, both have a wide 12-megapixel f1.8 camera with a digital zoom of up to 5x and smart HDR3 for photos. They can both shoot 4K at up to 60 frames per second and slow motion at 1080p with up to 240 frames per second. The only real difference in the hardware is that the Mini 6 has a quad LED True Tone flash, and the iPad Air 4 has no flash at all. Now, whether this actually matters to you in real life comes down to how you plan on using this camera. So if you want to take pictures in dark environments, then it matters. Otherwise, not so much. Personally, I use my phone for photos, so this isn't hugely important to me, but your use case may be different. Now, with the front-facing camera, the iPad Mini 6 actually comes out ahead with an ultra-wide 12-megapixel f2.4 camera versus a 7-megapixel f2.2 on the iPad Air 4. This new camera on the Mini 6 enables a feature called Center Stage, where the ultra-wide field of view combined with artificial intelligence allows the Mini 6 to track a subject as it moves through the frame and then zoom in or out to make sure that it's properly framed in the center. It's something that I've been using on my 2021 iPad Pro since it was released, and it's a really nice feature to have. And it's great for video calls and creating content with the iPad Mini 6. Here's a camera and microphone sample from the iPad Mini 6 and the iPad Air 4. In both cases, the camera is positioned on the side. So here's me looking at the camera of the iPad Mini 6, and here's me looking at the actual display. Then the same thing on the iPad Air 4. This is me looking at the camera, and this is me looking at the display. So hopefully this gives you a pretty good idea of what the camera system and the microphones on the iPad Mini 6 and the iPad 4 look and sound like. Moving on to the speaker system, again, we see some similarities. So both have 4 speaker grills, 2 on each side, even though there's only 1 speaker on each side of the iPad. What's great about this orientation versus something like the iPad 9, where both speakers are at the bottom, is that when you're watching content or when you're playing a game in landscape mode, you're getting stereo sound that's more directional and more immersive. Now, listening to both of these side by side, I am going to give the edge to the iPad Air 4 because it's louder and the sound is more full and rich. The sound on the Mini 6 is actually really good, and I was surprised that it was this good coming out of such a small device, but what we have coming out of the iPad Air 4 is slightly better. Now, neither of these come with a 3.5mm headphone jack, so if you want to use wired headphones or a headset, you'll need to get a USB-C to 3.5mm adapter or a hub. When we start looking at accessories, there are some similarities and there's one important difference. With this updated design of the Mini 6, both are now compatible with the 2nd generation Apple Pencil. So the Apple Pears charges and is stored on the side of both, and I definitely prefer this implementation over the 1st generation Pencil. As far as actually using the Pencil, the writing experience is very similar. So both displays are fully laminated, so there's no air gap, and both devices are extremely responsive. Now, the major difference, again, comes down to size. If you want a larger canvas to draw on or to use for note-taking, then the iPad Air 4 is the better choice. But if you want the most portable way to get 2nd generation Apple Pencil functionality, then the iPad Mini 6 is the way to go. Now, one major difference has to do with using a keyboard case. So the iPad Air 4 is compatible with Apple's Magic Keyboard and a host of other options from Logitech and other manufacturers. And if you want to see a detailed comparison of the Magic Keyboard and the Logitech Folio Touch, I'll link to that video in the description. The thing about the iPad Mini 6 is that a keyboard case would mean a really tiny keyboard or some sort of foldable keyboard, which wouldn't be as elegant and would add bulk. So you do have the option of using an external keyboard with both of these, but if you need the functionality of a keyboard case, then the iPad Air 4 is the better option. It might surprise you that the iPad Mini 6 actually has more processing power than the more expensive iPad Air 4. We're getting the newer A15 Bionic chip with a 6-core CPU and a 5-core GPU versus the A14 chip on the iPad Air 4. Now, very quickly in my Geekbench tests, I was seeing an improvement for single-core performance with 1750 for the iPad Mini versus 1582 for the iPad Air 4. And for multi-core performance, 4324 versus 4281. Now, will the average user actually notice this improvement in performance? In most cases, the answer is that that's unlikely. There are some tasks like video rendering where I could probably time this difference, but for the majority of users, this isn't going to be a meaningful difference. Now, both devices are extremely capable. They'll work great for gaming, for photo and video editing, and of course for everyday tasks. And both come with 4 GB of RAM. Now, having said all that, if getting the more powerful chip is a priority for you, that would be the A15 on the iPad Mini 6. Now, I just mentioned gaming, so speaking of performance, did I actually notice a difference? I was able to easily play any game that I wanted with both iPads. Gameplay was smooth, the controls were responsive, and I didn't experience any types of lag or glitches. The main difference had to do with handling the device. For portable gaming, the Mini 6 was super convenient. It was really comfortable to hold because of the size, and it definitely provided a gaming experience that was superior to using most phones. The iPad Air 4 was better when I was using an external controller, at which point it was functioning as a display, and I appreciate it being larger. Now, this is another area where I wouldn't focus too much on the specs in terms of processing power, and I would prioritize ergonomics and how you plan on playing. For multitasking, I have iPad OS 15 on both devices, so I'm getting all of the new multitasking features. It should be no surprise that I think that the iPad Air 4 is a better choice because if I have two apps open side by side, it gives me more space and everything is bigger and easier to read. Now, both devices also work with Apple's Sidecar features, so they can be used as an additional display for your Mac, iMac, or MacBook. Again, I give the edge here to the iPad Air 4 because the larger display gives me more versatility when multitasking. And when it comes to battery life, both devices are rated for up to 10 hours of surfing the web on Wi-Fi or watching video, and then 9 hours when using cellular data. This, again, is an area where I don't think we have a clear winner with either of these, and your actual battery life will depend on various factors like what games you're playing or what apps you're using, the brightness of the display, and then any accessories that you may be powering using the device. Now let's talk about the configuration and pricing options and then get to my conclusion about which one is better. Both devices are offered in 64 and 256 gig option. The iPad mini sells for $499 and $649, and the iPad Air 4 sells for $599 and $749. Both are also offered in cellular models, but the iPad mini 6 supports 5G, whereas the iPad Air 4 only offers 4G. All right, so which one of these is better? And it's actually a tough choice. Even though I think that the new A15 Bionic chip is super impressive, for most people, this choice doesn't come down to the additional processing power of the iPad mini 6, because the majority of users won't really notice a meaningful difference. If you're choosing between these two, I would focus on the size difference and how that will impact the types of things that you plan on doing. Like, do you value portability and 5G support, or do you value a larger display and the convenience of a keyboard case? The other differences like camera upgrades and audio quality are still worth mentioning, but to me, they're farther down the list. Hopefully this video was helpful. Click on my face to subscribe and then watch this video. You know what I always say? Buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.